Welcome to a tutorial video on JavaScript basics. In this video, I'm going to talk about conditional statements. In different programming languages, conditional statements are ways to control program flow. We test something and then react to that. If certain things are true, we do this, or if certain things are false, we do this, else we do this. We can control how things happen and test different values and then react to those tests. In JavaScript, like other programming languages, there's an extra data type. We talked previously of numbers and strings. There's also Boolean values. Boolean values are true or false. In JavaScript, they're represented are the keyword true or the keyword false, which we see here on lines 1 and 2. The value of test value 1 is equal to the keyword true, so it is the Boolean value true. On line 2, test value 2 is equal to the Boolean value false, so it is the keyword false. These are important because then we can start to talk about how Boolean values and what they represent are part of how conditional statements work. So let's see an example of that. On lines 7 through 11, we see the first example using the if keyword. The if keyword tests something. If the condition, the test, is true, if the result of this test is true, then code within its block will be run. Code within the opening and closing curly brackets. So within this parentheses, if whatever's in here, if the result of that is true, the Boolean value true, then that code will be run. We see here though, within the parentheses of line 7, test value, so the value of the variable test value, and test value 2, the value of the variable test value 2. In the middle, we see two bars. In many programming languages, and especially in JavaScript, these two bars are the OR operator. In Boolean logic, the logic that follows Boolean values, we test to see if something is true or if something else is true. So this is the OR operator. Using these two values, the one on the left and the one on the right, we test to see if one or the other is true. If this is true, that is one or the other is true, then the code within this block will be run. So the OR operator tests. Is test value true? It's represented as true. Or is test value 2 true? Well, this is false, but the first one was true, and so we can run this block. So we can use OR if these two values, one or the other. One just needs to be true. In this second example, lines 13 through 17, we're using a different operation. This is the AND operation. Instead of or, one or the other, now we want both of them, one and the other. So we see on line 13, within the condition, right here within the opening and closing parentheses, we see test value again, which we know to be true, and test value 2, which we know to be false. Well, test value and test value true would be false because they're not both true. However, we can use a new operator called the NOT operator or the negation operator to switch values. When it is included in front of a Boolean value, it switches it from whatever it was to another value, from true to false or false to true. So we see the negation of test value 2 with the value of false would be true. So now 13 with test value and the negation of test value 2 using right here, the exclamation mark, we see is true. This is true and the negation of test value 2 is true. Therefore, they are both true and rerun code within this block. Line 15, which we see over here on the right hand side, both values are true. So we can test to see if one or the other is true, or test to see if one and the other is true. They are both true. Either one of them is true using or both of them is true using and. So this is important because conditional operators within JavaScript, like many other programming languages, are based on this idea. We're testing to see if either both things are true or one or the other thing is true. So for example, moving down here to line 19 through 23, we see a third example. test value 3, which we'll scroll up to look at, which we know to be the number 4, and test value 4, which we know to be the string, notice the opening and closing quotations, 5. Well, the operation in the middle here is less than or equal to. Again, coming back to the idea of using or and using and operators. So either test value 3 is less than test value 4, or test value 3 is equal to test value 4. Well, we know 4 is less than 5. And so because one of these things is true, that's all that needs. This is the or, less than or equal to. So we see here less than 3, or test value 3 is less than test value 4. And so this is true, and we see this statement, line 21, the left value is less than or equal to the right value. So we could also just change this to less than and rerun this, and we see the same outcome. Test value 3, the number 4, is less than test value 4, the string 5. If we change this to greater than, it would be false. 4 is not greater than 5. 4 is not greater than or equal to 5 either, because 4 is not greater than 5 and 4 is not equal to 5. So as we see here on line 19 to 23 with this conditional statement, we can test across data types in JavaScript. We can test a number against a string and see if it's less than something else. As we saw, we can also test greater than, and if we wanted to test equal to, which is 2 equals right here, we could do that as well. But we know 4 is not equal to 5. So one last thing we can do is among equal, less than, greater than, less than, or equal to, or greater than, or equal to, is also the strictly equal. This is important because, as we've discussed here in this previous example, we can test across data types, and that could get very confusing because we can't be sure if something's a number or a string because the conditions work out either way. So we can use something in JavaScript called strictly equal. We see that here on line 25. Test value 4 equal 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 test value 5. This is the strictly equal operator. It tests that not only the values are the same, 4 and string 5, for example, weren't the same, but their data types are also the same. So, for example, if we came up to test value 5 and set it to 5, the string, we would see these are no longer strictly equal. Test value 4, just 5, and test value 5. Set this back, though, and we see they are not strictly equal. Well, that was slightly confusing, right? Because it disappeared. Well, the condition changed. The condition became true, and we no longer saw that output. The reason for that was because of this else statement. So, as we wrap up here, there are two different ways we can create conditional statements. Using the if keyword to compare something, a conditional, to see if this is the outcome of whatever we're testing is true or not. Then we can use an else statement to react instead of. So, for example, in this example right here, I changed this condition to make it true when I changed the value of test value 5 to the string 5. Then we no longer saw this output, which was down here on line 29. But if I change this back to the number 5, we will see this output, because now this condition, the condition found on line 25, is no longer true. So we no longer came into line 26. Instead, we use the else to move into this code right here, line 29. So the else statement or the else keyword is paired with the if keyword. If the conditional within the else statement is true, we do the code within the if. If an else statement is paired with that, then we do that code instead. Again, coming back to this idea of program flow or control flow. We do something if this is true, else we do something else. And this allows us a greater range of controlling things. So we do this if this is true, else we do this. So as a whole review here, let's come back to the top and talk about our values. We mentioned in JavaScript there are two additional data types, or an additional data type with two different values, true and false. Boolean values that we can then use to test things or set different values, using the keyword true as we see here on line 1 and the keyword false that we see here on line 2. We then tested them using the OR operator, test if something is true or something else is true, and if either of them is true, then the condition is true. Then on line 13, we use the AND operator to see if something is true and something else is true, and if they are both true to do something. And we mixed in the NOT or negation operator to negate the value of test value 2 from false back to true. And so test value and the negation of test value true are both true, and therefore we ran the code right here on line 15. We talked about comparing different values in the third example right here, using the less than or equal to operator. And we tested if test value 3 was less than or equal to test value 4. And we talked about how we can compare using less than or equal to or greater than or equal to across different data types. Comparing numbers and strings, it will allow us to do that. If we care about if something is the same value and the same data type, we can use strictly equal, which was 3 equal signs. And then as we saw, we can compare if statements, the if keyword, with else statements, the else keyword. So we can do something if this is true, or do something else it's not true and we act to this. And we can use if statements and else statements to control program flow as part of using JavaScript. Thanks for watching.